Hey everyone, I thought I would do a quick video on how to massively increase your damage. Now, the way damage works in Diablo 4 is very complicated. It's a lot of numbers and I'm terrible at math. But from what I understand, there's different buckets. So one's going to be basically your weapon. Now, that adds a certain amount. And then for me, I'm a sorcerer, so your main stat, because the higher your intelligence is, it increases your damage, and that's going to affect all of the other buckets. So like the weapon damage will be in a bucket. Vulnerable damage is in its own bucket. So vulnerable, its base value will do 20% more damage. And then your critical damage, that's in a separate bucket. So like if you critically hit someone who's vulnerable, it's probably a lot more damage. It's hard to keep track of all this stuff. But you got your intelligence in one bucket, your critical strike damage, then you're vulnerable, and probably your weapon. So it's really cool to find things like, oh, plus 30% damage to close enemies. And that's okay. But I want to have things like vulnerable, its own bucket, and then critical strike damage, and whatever the weapon does. So like core skills might be good. Just make sure you get vulnerable damage and critical strike damage. And however your class is, like for me, I can easily get vulnerable. I use ice shards, so ice shards, I hit an enemy 5 times in a row, they're vulnerable. Or if I cast my Frost Nova, everyone's vulnerable for 4 seconds. Bosses 6 seconds. So I can make them vulnerable, so that's what I'm going to focus on. And then the next thing is your Paragon board. It's very tempting just to go like, wow, 31% non-physical damage. And these are very easy to get. But what we want to focus on is, like, this is 31%, this is plus 31% non-physical damage. You want to look for things like under the additional bonus. Dealing elemental damage will increase all damage you deal to them 5x for 10 rounds. So this would be like, I do 3 different elements, so 15x. And you want to get those multipliers. It's way more powerful than just additional 31%, because there's lots of different modifiers. So this is the Elementalist. It's a great glyph, I think. And then you have Tactician is more for... Okay, so the bonus here is I deal 10% X increased damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive skill, which quite often I'm doing because Frost Nova is defensive, my ice armor and teleport is also defensive. There's one more socket. Yeah, the dog decided to interrupt me. So another socket here is Flame Feeder. Because of my enchantment, all of my direct damage causes enemies to burn. So here I get 10% X damage. But some of these other glyphs, it's just like plus 5%, and that's nice, but you have to get a lot of them. And it benefits to have damage in a bunch of buckets. So your intelligence will affect the plus percentage additional damage, and then critical strike is going to affect that whenever you crit. And if you make them vulnerable, that's going to... So it all adds up when you get your damage into multiple buckets. So my strategy is just to get the things I need, but focus on boards like... I think this one was... Focus on boards where you can increase your vulnerability. Yeah, here we go. I chose this board up here because it had plus 15% critical damage, and there's 2 here for additional. So you get, with these 3 nodes, you get plus 30% critical damage, and critical damage, you're going to do the most damage with that. And I also chose a board with, there's one board here, you get lots of vulnerable damage. So with my glyph, it increases to 39% vulnerable damage. We get additional ones there. I think there's 20% more vulnerable there. It's 10, 20. I don't have that one unlocked yet. So really just focus on your vulnerable damage and your critical damage. Yeah, so the biggest thing holding me back in the game, you want to definitely just work on doing your nightmare dungeons. The biggest thing holding me back isn't so much with damage. I can do tons of that, especially now. It's my survivability. Like some of the, you get hit by a lightning strike, or there's poison pools everywhere. That's what really kills me. But a good defense, or the best defense, is a good offense. And that happens often with this as well. Another point I wanted to bring out is some of the uniques, they're not really that powerful as you want them to be or think they are. Like Ice Heart Brace. I mean, there's some intelligence. It's not that great. I mean, it increases freeze duration, but you don't want the mobs to live that long. Like when you freeze them, you want them to die within a few seconds. So with this aspect, enemies that die while frozen have a chance to unleash Frost Nova, which will freeze everyone. I mean, the enemies just don't last long enough. So this is a Nightmare Dungeon tier 35. I don't think I've done this high before. But basically, I just want to like come in here and kill them quickly like this, you know? And here's an elite.
I'm not ready yet.
Like, he died a little bit slower because of the wall and everything, and
I'm not ready yet.
Not fully focused here. But you just want to kill things quickly. It doesn't really matter like that aspect where, oh, the Frost Nova might trigger on an enemy.
I'm not ready yet.
Oops.
I'm not ready yet.
See, these things could kill me so quickly. But as long as I can kill them in a quick enough time, it's not an issue. Okay, I'll just do the boss here.
I need time to prepare that.
So this boss is level 89, and I'm level 84 right now.
I need time to prepare.
And like normally I would do level 34. It's the first time doing level 35. Yeah. It's just quick and easy. The main problem is survivability, but because I kill things so quickly, you know, I don't often die. So another thing you can do is be aware of your aspects. Like this one, you take 30% less damage from crowd controlled or vulnerable. I'm always crowd controlling. Anytime something's chilled or stunned and all that stuff, they're crowd controlled. And I'm always making them vulnerable. So I got damage there. I've got increased armor here up to 40% every time I deal any form of damage. So focus on things like that for your survivability. And like for the weapon, I don't care what kind of weapon it is. All I saw was vulnerable damage, more intelligence, which is my main stat for increasing all damage I do, all types, and then critical strike damage. And my gear isn't even that great. I've been trying to switch over to getting those damage buckets going. But critical strike chance, I definitely want to make that, you know, 33% or higher. Get my critical strike damage higher, and then the vulnerable damage. And then everything else, like the Verse Lead, that's kind of like in its own, the all damage bucket. and you just add additional things. I'm completely ignoring it now. I've got to work on getting more like mana reduction cost, things like that. But yeah, that's just a quick guide. Focus on depending on your class. I'm not sure if all classes can do well with vulnerable damage, but if you can, fill that bucket, critical strike, and then on your Paragon board, look for things that are adding X amount of damage and get different types of those, and that's really where you're going to do all the damage. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hit the like button, and that's it.